Hi, I'm back, this time with curls. So last time we talked about new fun, today we're going to talk about famous funnies. Just 4 days after New Fun #1 was published, Eastern Color Printing printed its 7th issue of Famous Funnies. While I lavished attention last episode on New Fun for being the first comic book with all original material, it can't be stressed enough that Famous Funnies had already come out 6 times before this on a monthly basis, and this wasn't even their first go-around. From 1928 to 1930, they had published an earlier tabloid called the Funnies for 36 consecutive issues, discontinuing it because, well, perhaps it was just ahead of its time. But let me back up and talk about Eastern Color Printing for a minute. Because of DC and Marvel Comics, we often think of New York as the center for the comic book world, but Eastern Color Printing was based out of Connecticut. It was formed in 1928 to print Sunday color newspaper comic sections, but soon added magazine covers for the pulp fiction market and was one of the first to print them in color. Max Gaines and Lev Gleason, and you'll hear those names again from me in the future, worked for Eastern at this time and were on hand when Eastern started experimenting with making these early comic books, including these early issues of Famous Funnies. The comic books from Eastern before Famous Funnies, and there were many one-shots in addition to the Funnies, were not yet sold on newsstands but were promotional comics for single companies like Kinney Shoes or Shell Gas. This was great because they still got paid for making the comic books, but all the headache of all the distribution problems were now the problems of the companies that hired them to make them. But in 1934, perhaps just looking for more revenue, is when they tried newsstand distribution with Famous Funnies. And here we are, with licensed comic strips from 8 different newspaper syndicates for good variety, usually publishing comics from the previous year so they would not be fresh in their fans' minds anymore. Besides the content, Famous Funnies was different from New Fun in a couple ways. It was bigger, 68 pages long, almost double the size of the first issue of New Fun, and contained up to 4 pages of material from the same features instead of just one. The longest section in each issue of Famous Funnies belonged to Buck Rogers in the 25th century A.D. Yeah, that's the whole title. Buck Rogers was one of those megastars of pop culture in the 1930s, like Little Orphan Annie. Though best remembered today for the campy fun 1979 TV show, at its peak in 1934, Buck Rogers appeared in 287 U.S. newspapers, was translated into 18 languages, and appeared in an additional 160 international papers. It was the very first science fiction comic strip and spawned many imitators, like Flash Gordon. By this time, its radio show adaptation had been on the air for 2 years already, and Buck Rogers merchandise, particularly ray guns for kids, was everywhere. Buck Rogers was an odd strip. Buck didn't have much of a personality, and the plot-heavy feature moved Buck from rescuing either himself or Dale Arden, or both, from one dangerous situation after another. Alien species were not particularly creative. When Buck faces the Lion Men, the storyline being reprinted in Famous Funnies at this time, they were just called that because they had lion-like manes of hair. But there is the distinct advantage to going first, and Buck became the model for all future science fiction comic strips, at least for some time, and what they would be measured by. This might be a good time to have our first discussion about how you can read Famous Funnies for free, but not the Buck Rogers feature. We are blessed in our modern age by how many comic book companies went out of business over the years, which left no one to renew their copyrights and trademarks. When copyrights and trademarks were not renewed, that intellectual property falls into the public domain. So now there is a wealth of comic books and comic book characters from before copyright laws got stricter, we might talk about that again sometime too, that have fallen into this public domain. And what that means is that this now belongs to all of us. There are websites out there collecting scans of these comic books, Comic Book Plus and Digital Comic Museum being the 2 biggest ones. I'll post links to both of those in the comments section, and there are thousands of those comic books. But even though the comic books themselves may be in the public domain, Some characters used in those books may still not be. Like Sherlock Holmes and Zorro, someone saw at the time these characters had lasting commercial value, or thought they did, and made sure to renew their copyrights. The same is true of Buck Rogers, so these websites I just named can share the scans of these old comic books for free, but have to remove the Buck Rogers pages or face litigation. Just like no one can take these Buck Rogers stories and reprint them now without paying a licensing fee. Mind you, if you search the internet hard enough, you can still find some of those Buck Rogers pages out there. Perhaps after seeing them you'll agree that there are better strips for us to talk about in Famous Funnies. For my money, a far better read from the early Famous Funnies is Dixie Dugan. Dixie is a second-tier character with 3 pages instead of 4 dedicated to her most issues. Dixie Dugan is virtually forgotten today, but she had a comic strip that lasted 37 years and even a movie that came out in 1943. The character began life as a pair of novels that came out in 1928 and 1929 that were risque for the time, and Dixie was then a young showgirl. She gave up show business in the G-rated comic strip business and worked in a string of more ordinary jobs while failing to find love or getting into embarrassing situations or having her family complain about her or fun stuff like that. Before recording this, I thought a lot about why I like Dixie Dugan. Partly it's for the art. John Strebel did a great job of always keeping Dixie pretty, the art realistic, and the story easy to follow. But mainly I like Dixie because she's so relatable. When she quits a dog walking job because she's jealous of the attention the dog gets on walks, we can all relate to being jealous about something. While her strip was usually comic in nature, it was not cartoonishly funny or exaggerated. Her reactions seemed believable and what ours might be in a similar situation. It's slice of life fiction. Even when something exciting happens, like a jewelry store robbery, it's background information and less important than Dixie getting to the movies to see the latest heartthrob actor on the screen. If I didn't leave those pages up on the screen long enough for you to read, check out the links in the comment section below and go try Famous Funnies for yourself. And before you leave, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. If you like this channel and want to help me make a lot more videos, there's also a Patreon account you can subscribe to support me more directly. And the link to that is in the comment section below. So bye for now.